Burr, who's a hydrogeologist, is that what?
Geohydrologist, yeah.
Geohydrologist, anyway, one of those fancy terms. Talking about primary water, and it kind of builds off of the universal model. It builds off the universal model, and so we'll talk about the water and such on this. I think you'll find it very interesting. Let's just take a minute and let everybody introduce themselves so we know. Dennis Cox from Cedar is going to be a presenter, and Russ Barlow. And do as quick as I turn to you, I forget. So anyway, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself.
I'm Cody Lewis from Las Vegas. I'm just here with Russ.
I'm Paul Cousins, I'm from Cedar City, City Councilman on the Water Board. I'm Paul Monroe, I'm the General Manager of the Water Research District in Cedar Valley.
Dean Cox, Washington County Commissioner. Zachary Rentz from Washington County Commissioner.
Scott Taylor with the City of St. George Water Services Department.
Harry Holt, no title.
Bob Holt, his brother.
You're going to start on Zach over there.
Gil Holmquist, formerly St. George City and running for County Commissioner.
Kip Fuller, resident.
Mike Shroud, resident.
Barry Bundy of the Littlefield Hurricane Valley Natural Resource Conservation District.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Thompson. I'm a field supervisor for the Arizona Game and Fish down on the Arizona Strip.
Larry?
Larry Snow, State Representative, representing District 74.
Okay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Nick Moses, out of the Cedar City Water Rights Office.
We'll turn the time over to you.
Okay,
Dennis.
and that's my mom and sister that just happened to be down in the area from central Utah, so I said you might as well come over. Well, this is an interesting the thing we're doing, and it's exciting to be a part of this, actually. I was introduced to this about a year ago, and I really have gained a lot of respect for Alan and his tenacity to bring this together. And really, we're only here for one thing, and that's about water. So we're here to share some empirical evidences that there are other sources of water in the earth. As you mentioned, I'm from Cedar City. I'm a representative of the Universal Model, a new millennial science. I was at the Orem Expo last year at UVU when this was launched and introduced. I went up for other reasons, but when I went to one of these, I spent the next 3 days going taking in every seminar I could possibly take in. Russ Barlow is the editor of the Universal Model. Dean Sessions is the author. We'd love to have him, but he's holed up in the cabin writing and finishing volume 2, The Living System, right now. It's a 30-year work by Dean Sessions. He's compiled over 600 peer-reviewed documents and thousands of articles that are found in this book. So this isn't Dean Sessions science. This is from the scientists themselves. You can see I have read this thing so much I finally had to put tabs in there to find everything I wanted. I do want to show you one thing, though. In fact, let me just take a new one. This is, I'm just going to mention, this is a nonprofit organization. It's probably about a $150 college entrance level book. He shares them for $69 with anybody because it's not a money-making thing. But as you view through this, you're going to notice that there are quotes in blue, and nearly on every page you will see documented evidence of all of the research that has been found that you can find in this book. And he quotes portions of it. So again, this is not Dean Sessions, this is the scientists themselves over the last 100 years, literally. our own expense. Russ drove up from Las Vegas. He has a successful business down there that he runs, and he brought his friend here. Tell me your name one more time.
Cody.
Cody. It's going to lock in here, eventually, but kind of you to come up and help. I love Southern Utah, and I had no idea this would ever get to this place, but it's fun to be a part of. But if there's anything that can make any difference and help them with water situation in Southern Utah, I'm just a citizen, and I want to help. So I took some work off. I buried my son today in Cedar City from an automobile accident, and it was beautiful, and we're all healing. But I felt this was very important, and I wanted to come down here and be with Russ and do this. You've heard, some of you have met Mark Bird. Now, he's not associated with the universal model. He's a geohydrologist, as Alan mentioned. He has his own company. Is he based out in Nevada or California?
California, I think.
Called Primary Water. I mean, literally, primary water meaning water within the earth, the center of the earth, the middle of the earth. And like I say, we're not affiliated, but we're just excited that he's using the science of the universal model to travel around the world and help people find water that they would never even consider looking for. He's in Madagascar right now. They're drilling this last week. He's helped in California, I think a spot or two in Nevada and a place in Idaho, help them to find water again, not just looking for aquifers, but seeing this planet a little differently than what we have thought all of our lives. I'm not a scientist, Russ is not. We're not here to debate. We just want to present what we believe these new empirical evidences are. And in fact, that there was a universal flood that covered this planet, and that this is a hydroplanet. So we just ask you to consider the information. It's going to contradict, probably a number of you have science backgrounds. It's going to contradict a lot of stuff that we grew up learning in high school and college. So I'm just ask you to have an open mind and just weigh it out. And for me, I had to process it quite a bit. Because almost I had to go back up and rethink some of the things I've learned, and I think that you'll find that same thing. I want to move through it pretty quick, but if you got a quick question we need to go through, Russ is more adept at maybe addressing some of the things with drilling and searching for water, and he can maybe answer a few more questions. And then hopefully from this point, if you feel comfortable, Alan moving this thing, moving shaker, maybe pursue a little further with Russ Barlow or the type of people that do that kind of thing. So it really is asking you to make a major paradigm shift. And I want to just give you a brief review of where this comes from. So in the late 1700s, Isaac Newton, who we all know and respect, appointed his associate scientist William Whiston to the mathematical chair in Cambridge. He was the first one to propose that there was a comet that had an elliptical orbit that had passed the Earth and had caused a universal flood. And that it was a hydroplanet. Now he was laughed to scorn somewhat, like those scientists do, and then it's 100 years later and we go, oh wow, they knew what they were talking about. But at the time, you had the scientists that says this is a magma planet, and you had those with Whiston saying this is a hydroplanet. So they jockeyed back and forth, and over a period of time, the magma planet people went out because they said, explain to us where lava comes from. Well, they couldn't. Today, we have overwhelming evidence of exactly where lava comes from, and it does not come from magma. This is not a magma planet. So Darwinism and evolution came along, and James Hutton and Lyell, a geologist, had proposed the theory of uniformity, which stuck. Meaning, whatever happens today happened millions of years ago, and it just eroded and slowly changed until today. Only problem is, that means there couldn't have been a universal flood, because that would have disrupted that whole process, you see. But science and whoever has decided to adopt uniformity, evolution, and we've been programmed and taught it and had it pounded in our heads for generations. So what about flood? You can't have both. You can't have evolution, you can't have magma planet and have the universal flood. They just can't be together. So, as you know, scientists, they haven't let go of the magma planet idea, and evolution really is the foundation of geology. And you know that Darwinism said we come from monkeys. And if you read deep enough, like Dean Session, he's probably one of the greatest researchers there ever was, because that's not being a scientist, he's an amazing researcher. The 30 years he's been doing that is that if you go to the very beginning of what science says, we came from nothing. And then we become, I mean facetious, pond scum, and then we become monkeys, and on and on. Okay, so now there's a lot of pride, and there's a lot of money wrapped up in evolution, and all the things we hear, global warming, and all of that. So there's tons of money, pride, whatever. So today, I'm going to just present the first half of this and talk about these fundamentals. These are the things that Alan and I learned. And that's why he's excited to have you here, and we're excited to be here to help. And then, like I say, we'll move in, and we'll just kind of let the discussion flow where it needs to. You may have some particular questions and stuff that Russ can help us with. Okay?
And I'd like to comment too, that he's going to go through and kind of talk about the overview of what the universal model presents. But I'm going to get into some specific things about what and how we can look for this water that we're talking about, primary water, and how right here in our own part of the world, in the desert Southwest, how important that is. So as you're kind of going through, hold some of your questions until the end. I think some of them will be answered during my presentation.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, so this is the Santa Fe Desert. How many have been in Santa Fe? Okay, that's my own stomping ground, and I've asked the smartest people over my life, how in the world do you get a bulge in the earth coming up and you get this river that runs through it? And nobody could ever answer it. You can see on the right how steep that is when it rolls off toward Green River. And so when I started learning about the universal model, I thought, holy cow, this is starting to help me understand how this happened. So for me personally, I just had a lot of questions. We talked a little bit about this. I bought 13 of these books when I walked out of, and I apologize for the screen. They said it was adjusted. It's a little squatty. I walked out with 13 of these. I wanted every one of my family to have one of these, and we went up on Cedar Mountain and did a grandkids weekend, and we did all the experiments in it and taught our kids, and it was just a ball. And I tell you what, you take these young kids, and their eyes will just get that big, and say, Grandpa, why are we learning this other stuff in school? In fact, let me just tell you one today. This happened just today, with funeral and everything. My nephew, he came up and he says, hey, I overheard a couple of the grandkids a little while ago, and he says, they didn't know I was there, and he says, one of them said, do you believe all that stuff Grandpa's telling you? And he goes, I don't know, but that's crap we're learning at school. And he says, it makes a lot more sense than all that other stuff we're learning at school. So there it is from the mouths, young ones, and like I say, Mount St. Helens, I showed it to my daughter, she's a school teacher, she says, this was a steam explosion, there was never any lava. In fact, there was 600 feet of mud that went for thousands of acres, and my daughter said, I wondered why there was water down in the earth, because if it's full of magma, what was the water doing there? And so she had always wondered that, why? So what we're proposing is that this is a hydroplanet, and we know the crust is on average about 22 miles. What we're saying is that this mantle area is a rock and water mix, that there's a liquid outer core now, and that there's an ice core in the middle. Now, the reason they know some of this information is from all the earthquakes, and Russ will probably be able to explain that a little bit better, but every time there's earthquakes around the earth, they have equipment around the world that measure those earthquake waves that come through, and they always go around that center, so they know it's water, right? They know it's liquid?
Well, they know it's liquid.
Yeah, they know it's liquid. Now, they suspect, they've always thought it was magma, but they know it's liquid. Okay? And as you know and remember probably in science, that all of the continents were once connected together in what they called Pangaea, or the supercontinent. And what we're proposing here is, well, first of all, there's two forces that affect the Earth. There's a centrifugal force of the speed, and that's about 1,000 plus miles an hour. The Earth is spinning. And then you have the gravitational force. And between those two forces, what we're saying is it keeps the continents in equilibrium. So the idea that in fact, my son Heath Olson, he ran an engineering firm, Cedar, he's the one that passed. Now I just lost my train of thought, darn it. I'll think of it in just a second. Anyway, so you have these two forces acting on the Earth. Now, just like that, William Whiston proposed that there had to have a comet or another celestial object that came by the Earth 4,360 years ago, roughly, when the universal flood would have happened. Whatever celestial object came by the Earth, it influenced the Earth's centrifugal speed to slow it down enough that the gravitational force began to take over and to pull Pangea down into the Earth. Okay? Now, if you imagine if you take the crust of the Earth, this is actually 4 sheets of paper, but if you lay this on a basketball, that gives you a perspective of how thick the crust is with the Earth. Okay, so it wouldn't take much to disrupt the crust of the Earth. So as that began to slow down as that comet, or it could have been a large asteroid, we don't know. There's not enough data. There's one comet that has on about a 10,000 year rotation. Orbit, excuse me. But there's still not, but the scientists just don't have enough data. So, like I say, everything Dean's talking about is, like I say, it's the scientists and the current data that they have on all this stuff. Okay? So it disrupted the Earth's rotation. And again, the crust is very thin compared to the rest of the planet. So Pangea begins to collapse. And the only force that could cause what's happened, which will show you literally hundreds of empirical evidences that show that this took place, is gravity was the only force that could cause this to happen. So you look over there on this side. So as Pangea begins to plunge down in the Earth, you can see the water starting to fill up, and it's starting to create heat and pressure. As that continues to drop down, it's creating what we call hydrofountains that are thrust up through every fracture, every crack, every fissure, every fault line that there is, and starting to cause these hydrofountains to come up from below. So the unique thing that's happening here, as it plunges down in the Earth, and we're not talking just a little bit, we're talking 30,000 feet. So these airliners that are going over, that is about 5 miles roughly. That's what we're talking about. And there's something interesting about this. As the crust is being collapsed and pulled and jammed and crammed, it's creating heat in many of the places in the crust and generating temperatures up as high as 350, 400 degrees. And this pressure from that 30,000 feet is almost 14,000 psi. Now, there's something really important about that, why we know that. Back in World War II, there was a shortage on quartz because, back then they used quartz for all of their radios and for all the military. Well, they got them out of Brazil, I believe, and Russia and the United States had a shortage, so they not only sent their scientists out to develop an atom bomb, they were trying to figure out how to make quartz because they needed it so desperately. Well, they found out how to make it, and they could make it in a lab, okay? This right here is an autoclave. This, let me just say this, in World War II, not only did they figure it out, but they produced the quartz they needed, and that recipe there's actually 30 companies in the world that make man-made quartz, just like the Earth makes it. Now, Dean, he couldn't get that recipe from anyone, so he had to experiment for 2 years. I think he did about 75 different experiments to finally figure out what the formula was, okay? So he took this high-pressure reactor right here, and he put broken up sand and water in this autoclave, heated it up to that 350 to 400 degrees C, and he took this piece right here, he put a wire through it, and within 24 hours, it doubled the size of the quartz. This one here is another one that was done, but it had a mineral added in it, so it turned it to blue. I'm going to pass this around. This is actually one of the pieces of quartz that come out of Russia. When I was down the Rocky Minerals show down in Tucson, there was a guy that bought all the stuff off from the government that they had in the 50s. And if you see this, you can still see the metal, the little loop in there where they hung this piece of man-made quartz. Okay? There's a guy that produces a decorative, and I bought one for my wife for Valentine's. It has kind of a double crystal. Beautiful. But he uses a little different temperature and pressure, but basically the same principle. So what we're saying is that little experiment that Dean did is this. It's this 14,000 psi. It's the 350 to 400 degrees, and water and silica. And you can make rocks. Now, we don't hear that in geology because it's the technologist that's done this. The people are making money and selling it. I read the other day that over half of the quartz produced for the world is man-made now. Okay? And there's a piece right there. So, again, those conditions, that's the recipe for this to happen. Now, let's talk about dinosaurs just for a second. Just in the last few years, I think out of North Carolina State, there was a professor there that was looking in Tyrannosaurus rex dinosaur bone and found soft tissue. Right there's a YouTube video, I think you can see it. I kind of borrowed a picture offline. Well, scientists have said that if dinosaurs are millions of years old, that is not possible. There's no way you could have soft tissue from dinosaurs. Well, they did it, and somebody else in another university did that and found soft tissue. So literally we're talking to them being thousands of years old, not millions. Now, whether you're religious or not, there were certain civilizations on the earth in the beginning. The Hebrew Bible was one of them, and since we have a record of it, I just want to read that. In fact, Russ, will you read that? Would you read that?
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month of the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights.
Thanks. So, I've got a good friend, Cedar, says, well, I always knew there was never enough water in the atmosphere to flood the earth. I mean, scientists have proven it. Maybe that's why it makes it kind of laughable. You can probably get about an inch or an inch and a half on the earth if you took all the moisture. But we never read before that the great fountains of the deep were broken up. And then it rained 40 days and 40 nights. So it just kind of gives you a little historical perspective of this. Okay? So now Pangea has been pulled down deep into the earth, that 5 or 6 miles. And as the comet goes by, it starts to increase back in speed over a period of time that we don't know exactly. But through the course of that, it busted that Pangea up into the continents that we know today. Okay? And as they returned, then they came up, and of course another historical was in Peleg in Genesis, said that they recorded that the continents had divided. Okay? So now you have these continents that have eventually risen to the top. And just like your kids on a swing in a carnival ride, when you speed that up, they all eventually just kind of drift apart. Okay? Now this is some of the amazing things that have taken place on the earth. Scientists, geologists don't even know how to explain some of these. They're just so insane. This is one of the Grand Canyon. Interesting to know that that we learned that, well, that happened all from erosion over millions and millions of years. You know what the problem is? This is one of the side canyons of the Grand Canyon. There's not a river in it. There never was. In fact, there's multiple of those big, jagged things that go off the Grand Canyon that have never had a river in them. You can see some of these formations. So now I want you I want to propose to you a new concept that during the course of Pangea going down and back up, there were multiple earthquakes and tsunamis. Insane. I can't even wrap my head around what must have happened. Like, you know, down in Sumatra, when that tsunami, the earth plates down in the ocean dropped 30 feet, and it killed over 200,000 people with that tsunami. Now picture this earth. Where's that picture? Right here. Did you know that one side is 1,200 feet higher than the other side? 1,200 feet. Now picture what that would do to the earth as far as an earthquake. Okay? And they all match. But it's just insane of what would be going on as that Pangea plunged down in the earth and then returned back to the surface. Okay? Now, a lot of these things we've never been able to explain. I mean, how do you explain that? That's just craziness, right? A round ball formed sitting on this, what would have been kind of silty mud. But now if you figure the earth during that flood when it's like the bottom of an ocean floor with all of this soupy stuff, and remember the hydro fountains that were coming up through everything, and before long you start getting these hard parts of these harder formations of sandstone that have been formed, heated, and it's hard to even grasp how that'll happen. And I've really had to process a lot about it. And then if you take like this right here, here's a good example. If I fill this up with sand and I just start shaking it down, before long it drops right down. Now you figure all of this soupy stuff in the bottom of the ocean, earthquakes starting to shake it down. And when we went out on our tour with Alan, Dean Session was actually here. We went out on the Arizona Fall. I went down to the dinosaur tracks and that. He was talking about that. And he said, see that view right there? What happens, the earthquake is just shaking down the stuff around it, and that was a harder formation. And so you've got that butte standing out there, and everything else has just dropped right out of it. To just give you a little idea. Here's one for you. You see this arch. Well, they say, well, that happened from erosion. Well, there's not very many arches in the world that you can find that actually have all the stuff that fell off and eroded. What you do find is all been whisked away. There's no debris left under these national park and our famous arch. All that stuff's been washed away because it was formed. And you figure, I mean, my goodness, you think of ocean waters, they can literally rip a hole in an aircraft carrier. The force of water can literally rip through the hull of a battleship or an aircraft carrier. And you figure 5 miles of this with earthquakes going on like crazy and eating and beating and twisting and bulging and shifting, and it would have just been crazy what was going on. So we talked about this a little bit. The interesting thing you find about this, I grew up in the Santa Fe, that picture. Well, there's lots of fossils right on the top of the Santa Fe. Okay, right up in those top layers. Well, that's the same here with the Grand Canyon. You find all of these fossils on the top. That you don't find them down. You don't find animals and petrified wood and all that down on all these layers. And if that would have happened over millions of years, you would find that evidence, but you don't. But really, literally what you're talking about is the Grand Canyon literally ripped apart from an earthquake. Okay? Literally ripped apart. And the entire plateau on the one side dropped 1,200 feet. I mean, it's just insane when you think about it. One thing that I want to tell you, I'm going to go back just real quick. There's one thing I didn't tell you here. We've known quartz has been made for a long time, since the 50s. But what Dean did, and the guys who were helping him, is they put a piece of wood in this autoclave with the quartz, silica, and the water. And so you can picture this is heated at 350, 400 degrees. So it's going to be hotter at the bottom, and it's going to cool about 50 degrees by the time it gets to the top. And so that silica would dissolve, and just like a hydro fountain during the flood, it dissolved, and it would slake out, precipitate out into the crystals. Okay. So who here knows what petrified wood and petrified bone's made of? What's it made of, actually?
Quartz?
There is quartz in it. It has multiple colors and things, but it really is just a variation, right? Agate, jasper, chalcedony. They're just all quartz. Okay. What he found when he put that piece of wood in there is it petrified it, and it petrified it in less than 24 hours. Here's a picture of some of the runs he took. This is a failed attempt here. This is run number 59, where he put these pieces of wood in here. He always included a piece of quartz, going to kind of give him a way to monitor it. Run number 58 of producing a piece of petrified wood. What was interesting is that the wood actually in there actually caused a geo to start to form of the geocrystals. So this is, like say, 75 experiments later, and you can see this full autoclave. That's what it looked like. So he literally formed petrified wood and petrified bone in less than 2 days. Now that just changes our whole paradigm, doesn't it? I mean, really. We're told it's all millions and millions of years, but you saw that piece of flesh that they're finding that just thousands of years. Okay. Any questions? I know I'm moving really fast, but I'm trying to respect your time too. Any questions on that so far? Does that make sense? You're okay? Okay. Now, when Pangea, the continents, rose back up, the ocean crust began to form back. Now, this is almost all basalt. Almost all the ocean crust is made up of salt, just like what you're seeing up on the hillsides here. Okay? Just like these beautiful pieces right here that the rust has. Okay? And scientists know that it's much thinner and it's much younger than the continents. The continents were there. And I will make a side note. There's a lot of granite in the crust of the earth. And we know that that was here before creation because there's no fossils in granite. Okay? Or the granite types, there's no fossils in it. So everything else, since then, everything else that was formed has fossils in it. So here you have the continental crust, and as they drift apart, the basalt, the oceanic crust begin to fill in. Okay? Now this is one we did with our kids. Modern scientists, in fact, my son gave me a National Geographic magazine last summer in July. And it said in there's a glacier in there, and if it breaks off, this big glacier, it'll flood the oceans and raise the sea level 10 feet, and it'll flood all the cities that are on the coast around the world. That said it in there, I've got it. Well, this is what we tell our grandchildren. This is what scientists say happens. You take a glass of water, you throw glaciers in it, eventually it will run over, everybody dies, right? But this is what really is happening. Take a piece of pumice, you put it in water, and each time you slide a glacier in there, what happens to the pumice? Just adjusts, right? This would be kind of laughable, but there's actually a family that's had a golf course in Alaska up near where our kids live in Anchorage. They have had a golf course that they've had for generations, and we know that ice is heavy, and we know they are melting. We know that the glaciers are melting. As it has melted, it's heavy, and as they are melting off Alaska, the continent is raising to the point that they've added another 8 holes to their golf course. They now have a 16-hole golf course today. You Google it, it's in there. But isn't that fascinating? That just goes to show you that global warming it's just a theory. It's a scare tactic, I think. So now I figured out how the Santa Fe happened. I realized that now it makes sense to me in that as this bulged up in the earth, there was an earthquake that ripped the Santa Fe apart because it looks just like the Grand Canyon, and then the water ran through it. Because up there, the water should have run over to Price and down around to Green River. That's where the water should have gone if it had happened in natural erosive processes. But it didn't. It ripped apart by an earthquake. And then it ran through it. Now suddenly that makes sense to me. I've wondered that my whole life. Okay, so the evidence of a hydroplanet. This planet is made, and it depends on which site you Google it, but I've seen it in multiple places, that the Earth's crust is made of 90% of silicates or quartz-like material. Okay, even granite, there's a lot of quartz in it. You know, all the foundation rocks, everything has quartz in it. Okay, I'm going to show you something. So how can quartz have pockets of water in it? If our crust is 90% quartz, how could it have water in it if it was in a magma state or in a high heat condition? I'm going to pass the rocks around to you. And you'll notice that if you turn these around just right, you can see and you've probably seen them, but this one's got a pretty good one right in here. You can see a bubble. And I'm just, let's see, I've got my phone. I'm just going to show you this one. If I can pull my flashlight up. Now, I want you to look at this one right here. Can you see that big bubble of water there?
Yep.
This is actually a geode. Maybe can you see that? You see that bubble of water? It's a geode that they've published. Now, if all of the quartz, the rock, was created by magnet or high heat, we shouldn't have water in rocks. But we do. We find them all over the world. In fact, as soon as I started looking, I found out that in hydro, that's what they call them, in hydro quartz, you can find them at the rock shop. I ordered 25 of them from China. You can get them online. You've seen that, haven't you? You can see them online. Out there everywhere. They're all over the earth. Okay. You see that, baby? You can even hear it. You can shake it. You can hear it. See that? You see that? You see that? Very good. And you've seen this one, I believe, too. So everybody saw it? You've seen it? So that's one of the evidences. What is water doing in quartz? Why don't we talk about it in science? That's a pretty interesting thing. Bubbles of quartz everywhere. Now, there's another characteristic of quartz that provides the evidence of what we're saying is not some wild idea. When you rub two pieces of quartz together, it creates an electrical current called piezoelectricity. Okay? That right there, everybody do you recognize what that is?
Piezoelectric igniter.
It is. Good job. You're like one of the few. You'll recognize this part right here because when you go start your barbecue and there's no wires connected, you push that baby, and what you're doing is anytime you take quartz and you compress it or stretch it, it produces electricity. And that's got to produce a pretty good spark to ignite your gas. So you've been using piezoelectricity all along. And all it's doing is spring load, and it's just compressing that little piece of quartz in there. Okay? Now, I want to show you something else. I just found these rocks laying around, and I want to show you just how impressive this is. I've done a lot of scouting, okay, up in Emerald, or up Cedar. And of course, you take the flint and steel and you get the sparks off, which is also electrical sparks. But watch this. Would you mind hitting those lights back there? Are they just those two lights right there? Let's see if it's dark enough we can show you. If you'll notice this, can you see that? It's literally making the entire piece of quartz glow. Can you smell it too? Look at that. Now, in my mind, I thought the quartz was. You see that? I thought. Oh, sorry, Russ. You see, it's just right down deep into the rock. Okay. You can sure smell it too. Everybody got a chance? Some? Okay, thank you. Turn the light back on. So we can get electricity out of rocks. Now here's the thing. If you heat quartz over 570 degrees, it destroys the piezoelectricity. Now this was found out by Madame Curie. Okay? The Curie principle. And it's all documented. That's how that number came from. So if you heat this over 570 degrees, it destroys all the piezoelectricity. But you can go in your backyard and find a couple pieces of quartz around St. George, because there's plenty of it, agate and jasper, and it'll have piezoelectricity. It was never in a melt. It would be impossible. The crust of the earth was never in a melt. Or it turns from an alpha state to a beta quartz. Okay? And you don't find very many of that around. The quartz is, like I say, it works every time. Am I miss anything on that? Okay. And that was fun for the kids to do, to see that done. I think I'm missing something, I can't remember. This here, if you drive out of St. George and you go through the cut, somebody tell me they call it French fries on the right, and I like the hexagonal stuff that juts out of the hill up there, and I wished I had one in my yard. But I stopped and picked one of these up and heated it. And I've actually got a little video here in a minute. Oh, I got to show you one other thing. Would you hit those lights one more time? This is a little LED, and it has some quartz laying in that thing that Dean had made up. Can you see that? When you stretch or compress quartz, it produces electricity. And there it is. It's producing it. Or I can do it that way too. Okay? So just as a proof, can everybody see it from this far? Right. Okay, thank you. Now, the question is, well, where does all the heat come from? We've been told there's magma and lava. Well, first of all, we all know that most of the lava comes from the Ring of Fire and along the Congo Plains back in Hawaii. Okay? So, what scientists have found for a long time, that if you take the plates of the Earth or any along these fault lines, and there's so much pressure on it, if you even move it a few millimeters, it will literally molten the rock. So it gets dangerous over in Hawaii. The lava isn't the problem. I mean, it's going to ooze out and flow. But it's when it grabs hold of some water down there and turns it into steam and then gets behind the lava is when it becomes dangerous. Okay? So that's where the heat's coming from. And you got these rare, these spots around that are not right by these plates. But if you study it, you'll find out they are. This is a side note. Clinton and all them they were taking trips down to Antarctica. They were getting ready for the big, we're going to take the rest of your tax money for global warming. And Antarctica does have melting glaciers. But what they failed to mention is on the left side of the Earth, there's a lot of seismic activity, and it is accelerating the melting of the glaciers. They failed to mention that on the east side of the Antarctica, it's actually putting ice on. Okay? But we don't get that. We don't get that information. So that's where lava's coming from, is from the activity, the seismic activity. It's that constant, and that's why St. Helens blew its lid. It was like a boiler down there. They started getting enough seismic activity that it started building and building and building, heated steam just like a boiler. And then you know how to, like a balloon, you just get a little pinprick in that balloon and the balloon blows up. That steam just finally found through a fissure somewhere and got to the surface, and then the whole thing just blew the... Well, scientists said, well, it's from all the glaciers on there. That's where all that millions of tons of mud that flowed all the way down the river systems and blocked shipping. But months later, it did it again. But the snowpack wasn't there anymore. Okay, this is a little side note. And, you know, we're fire hosing you down, and I realize that, because it's such a complex thing, and it's, you know, going over our whole history of things we've learned. This is Long Valley, California. The government in 1995 decided, why aren't we tapping into the heat of the earth? We could heat the whole United States. Okay, so they found all the best places, they finally narrowed it down, and eventually they settled on Long Valley. The geologist or whoever would do this is what they proposed. They said, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to go down here, we're going to find this magma, and then we'll get down to this molten magma. We can just tap that heat, and we're good to go. We're going to save this country millions of dollars in heating costs. Picture the thing. Drilling well, they got down about 7,500 feet. Now, mind you, this was kind of a seismic active area anyway. The earth, they'd already shown it was kind of lifting, okay? So then, I better shut that off. Then the problem was the drillers got down about 7,500 feet, and the temperature quit getting hotter. I mean, it got hotter up to 7,500 feet down, but not as hot as they expected. They expected it should have been increasing. And then the next 3,500 feet, it never raised at all. It never got hotter. They just scratched their heads and went home. Dean Sessions actually called one of the guys on the project and asked him about it. Now that's the author of the book, because he'd read their drilling reports and everything, and he says, "We don't know. We just don't know." They scratched their heads and walked away, because it really was just a theory based on a theory of magma. This is from MIT. These were shared with the universal model. They've done these all around the planet. You can see this comes all the way through the crust, all the way down to the mantle, to the core of the earth. They've been able to send work up a tomography. This is in Central America. Notice where all the heat is. Notice large bodies of water. Notice that it gets less hot as it goes down. Notice the little white spots where there's been lots of active earthquakes, and see where the hottest places are on the crust. Okay? All of that's in the book. It's got half a dozen of them from around the world showing that. Who knows what that is? Well, it says what it is. How many have been there? Okay? So, we talked about the hydro fountains coming up out of the earth. Now, where's that? That's what I want a chart of. There it is right there. So we see all those hydro fountains coming up through the earth, through every crack and fissure in the continents going down. So if you read the billboards there, it says that was all from erosion. It came from the valley and eroded and blew in there in that great big pile. Here's the problem. And there's a thing of it. And look how beautiful and pure it is. Pass it around with you. It's really fine. It's really fine sand. It's just so beautiful. Well, I went down and went around the ledges around Coral Peak, and I gathered up all the different colors from all the ledges. I've got a representative bunch of quartz, of the sandstone, and then I had now that you can Google that on Google Earth, and it'll look just like that. I was able to snap a picture of it, but it doesn't look like anything around it, right? So how did that happen? So now you picture one of these hydro fountains. You've got, remember, 350 to 400 degrees. You've got the 14,000 psi, and what happens? Just like in that experiment, you can dissolve cores. So now you've got this planet, the heating of these plates as Pangea is going down and back up, and it's dissolving material in the crust. It could be down in the mantle, some of the rock in the mantle. And as that comes up into the bottom of this ocean that's 4, 5, 6 miles deep, it cools, and then it just all settles to the floor. Okay? And the reason we know, now what I did is we had my grandkids, we smashed all these pieces up, and we took a teaspoon of each one, we mixed them all up at Grandkids Weekend, and we put them under a microscope. There's a picture of it now. Does it look much like those ledges that are all around that area? It's almost surreal. When you walk on it, you feel like you're on another planet. And look at the difference. When I crushed these up and put them in here, I almost felt guilty. I thought, holy cats, nobody's gonna believe that, because those ledges look kind of red, right? But, so I actually threw some extra red in, and still, when you break that sand down, that fine particles, it's virtually clear. It just has just a hint. And you look at the coral pink sand dunes, and by the way, this is a new part of the science in the universal model, is this is skeletons of microscopic organisms that have colored the quartz, because if you look close, they're clear. Quartz is clear, just like those pieces I passed around, okay? You look at sand up close and it's clear. It's just coated usually with some kind of a microorganism that's tied on it, okay? Look at this one. Look at this aerial view. New Mexico, white sands down there. Look at this, black, dark brown around, and these massive pile. This massive dune, look at it close up, it's just pure white sand. There's not millions of years of debris and other stuff blowing in and washing in, and no, it's just almost uncontaminated looking, okay? Have you ever seen any crystal mountains around the earth that look like that? Because sand would have to have eroded from a crystal mountain. You think of those beautiful Daytona beaches, and you see places around the world on TV, and it's just beautiful, white, pure colors. Well, it would have had to come from something like this, but we don't find that anywhere on the planet. Okay. Here's a rock pillar formation. You know, you look around St. George and Cedar City, northern Arizona, and it's just crazy, because we look at Gotham Valley and all those places. How could this possibly happen? Now, picture the bottom of the ocean, this silty, soupy stuff. You've got a hydro fountain that's beginning as the heat and pressure is dissolving material coming up through this ocean bottom, and then it starts to solidify, and then the ocean waters from the flood continue flushing and washing as earthquakes, tsunamis,